Hi everyone, welcome to Nukleopatra, Making a Dead or Alive album with me, Barry Stone. If you're listening to this, then chances are you're a fan of the band Dead or Alive and this, their 6th studio album. I have been a huge fan of this band ever since I saw Pete in that purple dressing gown in the music video for You Spin Me Round in March 1985. I was 14. It's hard to believe less than 10 years later I ended up making this album with my pop idol Pete Burns and his chief supporter Steve Coy. The Nukleopatra album is such a special one for me, and I know it's a much loved album among many Dead or Alive fans. The album has just turned 30, so I wanted to do something to not only mark the occasion, but also to pay tribute to Pete and Steve, who are sadly no longer here to enjoy this moment with us. The podcast is a chance to look back and share the story of how this album came about, how I got to work with Pete and Steve, our time in the studio, the album's release, and its success all around the world. We'll go through each track on the album, and I'll share my memories about the recordings. Basically, we're going to have a Nukleopatra party, and what kind of party would it be without a few guests? To help me celebrate, I'll be chatting with many of the people involved in the Nukleopatra project and who worked with the band throughout this era of the Dead or Alive story. Here's a little taste of what's to come.
I know Pete was very enthusiastic with that album. It was a lot harder than anything they'd done before, and it really worked well with Pete's voice.
Pete was a pop star and we were very impressed. We were sleeping on the floor of a squat in a basement. So for us, it really was the high life.
He really was unique. And I've photographed quite a few people and I've never really come across that energy since.
Steve would be there. He would literally never let him down. It was unparalleled relationship, those two.
The first impact of meeting Pete Burns is one of shock and awe, really, in a way, because he was so much a larger-than-life personality.
We looked at each other thinking, we will never see anything like this again.
Before we go back though to 1994, when I first met Pete and Steve, it might be a good idea to set the scene as to how I ended up working with the boys. This is kind of unbelievable to me now, but it is what happened, so buckle up. I started work at PWL Studios in March 1989. Being told I had this job was literally a dream come true, as I'd been hounding them to let me in the building since the summer of '87. The record Stock, Aitken and Waterman made with Dead or Alive really had such an impact on me. I became just as obsessed with the production team as I was with the band, and now I was actually going to be working for Stock, Aitken and Waterman. Pete Waterman Limited was seriously going to pay me money to enter the building every weekday and sit in the same rooms as Mike Stock and Matt Aitken as they put together the next hit single for the likes of Kylie, Jason and Bananarama. Mad. A few months into the job, and Sherry, our studio manager, told me that she was going to move me downstairs to assist Ian Curnow. Ian was one half of the production team Harding and Curnow and worked out of the Fairlight room, which was in the basement of the building. This was actually such a lucky move for me. Up to that point, I'd been so mesmerised by what was going on all around me, it was hard to take in a lot of the more technical things that were happening. Ian was a fantastic mentor, and I learned so much from working in the Fairlight room and being his assistant. The other amazing thing about working in that room was that it was pretty much exclusively Ian's room. No one else used it. So at weekends or holidays when Ian didn't work, the room was there for me to use. And that's when I started doing my own tracks. And before long, I was writing and recording my own demos. You see, I did also have my sights set on being a pop star myself. And by 1991, I'd played Pete Waterman some of my early demos. He liked them and encouraged me to keep going. I spent many months working weekends, throughout the night, anytime I could, gaining experience writing, playing, programming and recording, all in Ian's room. And while I'm busy learning how to produce and make records, completely oblivious to the dream production job that's about to come my way, Dead or Alive have parted ways with Epic Records, apart from in Japan, where they're still very much supported by Sony. They've released their 5th studio album, Fan the Flame Part 1, as well as 3 singles, the first of which is Your Sweetness Is Your Weakness.
Someone else has taken what's
band finish another successful sellout tour of Japan promoting the Fan the Flame album. The band also part ways with their management company, and band member Steve Coy steps into the role. Steve sets about trying to find a new home for Dead or Alive and meets with lots of labels in the UK. One of the labels he started talking to was none other than PWL. Now here's where I should explain that PWL, Pete Waterman Limited, was both a recording studio and a record label. The studio was used by many different artists and most of them were not released on PWL Records. But the majority of artists who had been signed by PWL Records did have some connection to the studio. At some point in 1993, Pete Waterman told both myself and Julian Gingell, my good friend and creative partner, that he was thinking of signing Dead or Alive, and did we think there was a place in the market for them? I was taken aback, and my first response was like, yeah. This was mad. The thought I might actually get to meet my pop idols was just too exciting. But this was becoming more of a realistic prospect as Pete Waterman was indeed very serious about signing Dead or Alive to his label PWL International. The label's managing director David Howells was there to facilitate this. I caught up with him to find out how Dead or Alive ended up back at PWL in the 90s. But also as David was there when Saw were putting the finishing touches to the Youthquake album, I was keen to hear about his experience of meeting Pete and Steve pre-Spin Me success.
It was an extraordinary period for me in as much as that my lease had run out. I'd mentioned this in a conversation with Pete and I said, I'm looking for new premises. And he said, well, I've just taken over this extraordinary converted powerhouse in Borough. Why don't you come over, have a look and see how that could work for you and your team? Went over, thought it was extraordinary space, massive, because there were only 3 or 4 blokes and a dog at the time when I went. And then he played on me all these great things that he was doing. So the initial thing I heard was the track first before I met Pete and Steve, because he was showing me what they were about to do as Stock Aitken Waterman, where they were going, what. So that process, then when the guys came in, they were still working on the album. So I came to know them from that. So then, of course, the first impact of meeting Pete Burns is one of shock and awe, really, in a way, because he was so much a larger-than-life personality. And I found him to be hysterically funny, charming and delightful, as was Steve Coy, and I saw them very much as a solid team. The other 2 guys I didn't really get to know at all. And and we seemed to hit it off. But as I say, I wasn't in the studio. I wasn't needed in the studio. It was meeting them in the corridor, meeting them in the kitchen. And sometimes they'd ask me questions and say, what do you think about this? Or, I mean, I wasn't involved with them directly in any sense, but they seemed to be able to turn to me for advice sometimes. And as I say, we tried at PWL to build a family. I mean, that was certainly my part of the concept, was how do we get all these people together that work together, support each other, and grow together. This was a very open format, as you will know. And hopefully we were able to encourage people to grow and develop.
Yeah. Just thinking, in terms of the timeline, was Spin Me a hit by the time you moved into the building?
I think it was just around that time, just before it took off.
Right.
And the thing that was evident, obviously, listening to Princess, listening to particularly the Pete Burns stuff, this was going to be a big record. This was going to be something. And then the Princess track was obviously going to be a big record. And that was very exciting to come in at that point. So Pete had done a lot of his groundwork, but was now about to really take off.
Yeah, and 2 completely different sounding records as well.
Which again epitomized what PWL was all about.
Dead or Alive made 2 albums with Stock Aitken and Waterman in the 80s. Youthquake was released in May 85, and the recording of its follow-up, Mad, Bad and Dangerous to Know, released in December 86, by all accounts was not a pleasant experience for either the producers or the band. This led to Dead or Alive parting ways with both PWL and Saw for the next 2 albums they'd record. Stock Aitken and Waterman were already enjoying huge success before the band decided to take their business elsewhere. Bananarama's Venus and Mel and Kim's Respectable were just some of the hits already under their belt at this point. The building, now known as the Hit Factory, had a reputation for churning out, well, hits. After the band's departure, the production team went from strength to strength, launching the careers of Rick Astley, Jason Donovan, and the jewel in the crown, Kylie Minogue. David Howells was managing director of the company throughout this whole period of success and was there to support Pete Waterman, helping with everything involved with running the company. David was also the man who gave me his business card when I first stood outside the building in 1987, as well as being the person to tell me I had the job when I returned in 89. David told me that during this period of unbelievable success, conversations with Pete Waterman tended to be brief, and most times it would involve Pete Waterman announcing something, with David then going away and doing his best to make it happen. And this is exactly what happened in 1993, when David was first told about Dead or Alive returning.
Pete just said one day, Pete Burns is looking for a deal. I think we've got a relationship here we can develop, despite the differences and volatility of their previous relationships. So that was an exciting moment. Great idea to have them come back. But then almost as soon as they were back, it all started to kind of drift apart. I think part of it was due to the fact that Pete, Waterman, found a lot of other things to interest him at that point in his life. And so as though the intention was right, he didn't have the focus. And I think, particularly with someone like Burns, you had to have focus. So again, I found myself somehow being asked advice by Pete and Steve. PWL had gone through this amazing arc of success, hit after hit after hit after hit. And again, Pete's vision of what makes a hit, how do you promote a hit, all that stuff. His contacts in the retail trade, in the radio, TV were exceptional, and he knew how to find openings and exposure, which was where many artists fall down. They just don't get the exposure. And then Burns was obviously a controversial figure in himself.
Were there any conversations when Pete Waterman mentioned that he was thinking of signing Pete Burns? You know, Pete Burns by this point did have a reputation of being possibly quite a difficult artist. Obviously, the relationship with Epic Records had fallen apart. Did you have conversations about that?
Waterman was confident that he could deal with it.
Yeah.
He understood what he was getting into, obviously. I think Waterman also knew about his own volatility. This was a chemical combustion made to explode, these two.
Right.
But somehow they found a common language. Not all the time.
Yeah.
But no, it obviously was a good idea.
There were so many great sounding aggressive dance records around at this time. Perfect inspiration for what a modern Dead or Alive record could sound like. Julian and I had started going clubbing together, and one record I always remember hearing out and loving was Hell's Party by Glam. It sounded so tough and to me had a punk energy to it. Another hard sounding record was Take Me Away by Capella, which again I thought a backing track like that with Pete Burns' voice on top would, as the kids say, really slay. Let's have a quick blast of these two records that I had in my head as a reference for what a Dead or Alive record could sound like back in 1993. Julian and I had started doing some work together in the basement around this time, remixing and adding keyboards to various productions Mike Stock had been working on in the Top Studio. We hadn't written anything together up to this point, but after our chat with Pete Waterman, I thought if Dead or Alive were coming back to the building, then writing a song for them would be a good idea. Julian had a great title, Getting Away with Murder, and we worked on a chorus together we imagined would suit Dead or Alive. I then worked on the verse lyrics, and between us we built up a track. The more we worked on it though, the more I fell in love with it. And by the time I came to do a guide vocal, I had become so attached to it, it became one of the songs from my artist project, which by now had a name, Belvedere Kane, and Getting Away with Murder was one of the songs I started playing to labels. I only mention Getting Away with Murder because it comes up again later in the story. In late 1993, a date was set for Pete and Steve to return once again to PWL Studios, this time for a writing session with Mike Stock. The last time a Dead or Alive record had been worked on in the building was in 1986, when the band's third album, Mad, Bad and Dangerous to Know, was recorded in the very room the boys would now be writing in with Mike. There was a definite buzz in the air as word got round the building that this legendary band were due to make a return. Some of the younger staff who weren't part of the team back when the band had last recorded in the building had heard plenty of stories about Pete Burns and were excited to see him return. None more so than me. Now, you've got to remember, I am a huge fan of Pete, Steve and the band, didn't I say? Part of the reason I'm working in the building is because of my love for this band and the records they made with Saw back in 84, 85. So of course I want to be around to see Pete and Steve if they're back in the building. The day arrived and I remember spending a lot of time loitering around reception and patrolling the hallway and stairs up to the kitchen to catch a glimpse. And then, all of a sudden, when I came up from the basement, there Pete was, waiting on reception. In a red Vivienne Westwood bondage suit. He clocked me straight away so I didn't stare, but I'd finally seen him in the flesh. The Pete Burns. We didn't speak that day, but I definitely had a spring in my step after seeing him up close. So Steve was also in that day, and the pair of them worked upstairs with Mike. This collaboration had such amazing potential, and I was really excited to hear what would come out of that room. Mike Stock is an incredible powerhouse of a songwriter and had experience bringing the best out of the many artists he'd worked with. They were collaborating on new material, and details of the session are all a little bit hazy, but here's what I do know. They did write something, and Pete did sing something, which was recorded. A multi-track tape does exist, and one of the songs, Can't Break It to My Heart, I remember hearing the chorus of, and it was really good. From the multi-track tape label, it looks like they also recorded I Don't Care About Your Heart, which some of you will know was a song that already existed at this point. So I'm not sure as to why that was recorded in this writing session. Anyway, it's been well documented that these Dead or Alive sessions led to Mike Stock leaving the partnership with Pete Waterman. Mike felt it unfair that the writing and publishing royalties for the songs written in this session were going to be split with 50% for him and Pete Waterman, and the other 50% going to Pete Burns and Steve Coy. So Mike, who felt he'd be doing the majority of the work, would only receive a 25% share of any earned royalties from the songs written. Mike addressed this with Pete Waterman and suggested it would be a fair arrangement if he were to receive a 50% share and the remaining 50% be split 3 ways between the others. Waterman was in no way ready to accept this arrangement. There was a huge row which ultimately led to the end of Stock and Waterman's partnership. The band that had given Stock, Aiken and Waterman their first #1 were also the band partly responsible for bringing what was left of the partnership to an end. I think at this point of the story, it might be nice to hear from somebody who was with Pete and Steve throughout not only this period, but from the very beginning of the band and throughout the entirety of their career. In fact, nobody knows more about Dead or Alive than our next guest. I was beyond thrilled to sit down with the one and only Lynne Burns to talk about the Nukleopatra era. I first met Lynne, Pete's former wife and long-standing creative collaborator, when she would join us for many of the recording sessions for this album. I used to love it when all 3 of them would come in. They'd be yapping away, laughing and arguing, but the closeness they had was clear for anyone to see. These 3 were tight and an absolute joy to be around. I was so ecstatic that Lynne agreed to sit down and chat with me. I hadn't seen her for many years, so it was really lovely to catch up. Lynne was quick to let me know that the 90s is all a bit of a blur, but I knew with a bit of prompting I'd jog her memory, and we chatted about so much that Lynne will be popping up a lot in the episodes to come. But here is how our chat started. I'm going to take you back to 1993. The band still had the deal with Sony in Japan.
Right.
Steve is now manager and looking for a suitable home for the band outside of Japan.
Okay.
And Pete Waterman is back in the boys' lives. What do you remember about this time and Dead or Alive signing to PWL Records?
I don't remember.
Anything?
No, I've no recollection of that.
No.
I mean, I do know there was a bit of going back to the Waterman stable,
Yeah.
but I don't know. And this was to record Nukleopatra.
This was like the beginnings of Nukleopatra. So basically before
I know they'd taken time out, and it was almost felt like a comeback.
Yeah. They were still big in Japan, and the last album, Fan the Flame, had not been released outside of Japan, apart from import. So it was a bit like a comeback.
Yeah.
But when they kind of hooked up with PWL again, I guess there was a deal on the table, so Steve was probably interested. Oh, we could have a deal here. So they were back. But before they worked with me on the album proper, they were put in the studio with Mike Stock to write some songs.
Oh.
Do you remember that?
No.
So they were, I think they had about, it was probably only 2 days, but it didn't go well.
No. I do know that Pete loved working with Mike Stock. He learned a lot, because he was a great songwriter and arranger, wasn't he?
Absolutely.
So I imagine Pete was very disappointed that didn't work out.
More from Lynn later. As much as I would have loved to have heard what a Dead or Alive and Stock Waterman album in the 90s would have sounded like, it wasn't to be. But my disappointment didn't last very long, because quite soon after this, I found out that Pete Waterman now needed someone to get in the studio and help the band record some new tracks. That someone was going to be me. All that manifesting I'd done from my teenage bedroom was finally paying off. And now, not only would I be getting to meet my favourite band ever, I was actually going to be making a record with them. Back in the 90s, we had these things called filofaxes. This was before our lives were stored in our phones, and these little book-type things were where you'd store all your contacts, and it also doubled up as a year planner. Luckily, I've kept all mine, which is why I'm now able to tell you that the Nukleopatra album got underway on the 25th of January 1994. This was the day I first met Steve Coy, when he rocked up at PWL with a box full of floppy disks and a shitload of ideas. I imagine I would have spoken to Steve over the phone prior to him coming in, and I'd imagine he'd told me ahead of time that we'd be starting with a cover version of David Bowie's Rebel Rebel, in which case I would have programmed up a basic arrangement for us to start with. Steve knew exactly what he wanted to do, and I was there to help him do it. He brought in loads of records he liked the sound of and wanted to draw inspiration from, and we set about building up the track, adding whatever we felt it needed. I'd suggest something and he'd let me spend some time doing that, then he'd suggest something and I'd go searching for a sound or a loop. We had hundreds and thousands of samples in libraries on discs that were always floating around the building, which everyone would share. I'd audition the sounds until I found one either I liked or until Steve would shout that one, and bit by bit we'd build up the track. In my head, I always thought we'd had done this for a few days before Pete first came in, but the diary says we did a guide vocal on the second day. Whether that's Pete or not, I can't be sure, but I do remember we had it in pretty good shape before Pete came in to sing. When he arrived that first day with Lynn, Pete was very excited about using a certain string sample all over the track. I'm there to try whatever Pete and Steve want to experiment with, so off I go sampling these strings. And despite my initial thought that it was very random, they actually sounded pretty good. It was slightly surreal, to say the least, to be in the room with Pete, Lynn and Steve after the amount of hours I'd spent as a kid thinking about these three. The first thing I'll say about Pete was that he smelt amazing. Let's put that out there first of all. I think his perfume was called Angel. Anyway, despite the bizarreness of meeting them all at once, I do remember that it felt so natural. I'm sure I was pretty quiet while these three were gabbing away and sharing stories with me from their very colourful past. I was in awe just sitting there listening. But I did have a job to do, so that was probably a good distraction from thinking too much about how crazy and unbelievable this whole situation I just found myself in was. The diary says we spent about a week on Rebel Rebel. Somewhere in that week, Pete stood behind the Calrec in the Fairlight Room vocal booth, and I pressed record. For whatever reason, whichever way the levels or reverb I had set up that day, Pete absolutely loved the sound of the vocals he was hearing back in his cans. He couldn't stop telling me how much he loved it and how no one else had ever been able to get this sound before. So I should say that I did not at this point, and still would not to this day, consider myself an engineer. An engineer, for those who don't know, is the person in the studio who helps a producer get things recorded. They make sure everything that needs to goes down to tape and that it sounds the best it can. It's quite a technical job, and I wouldn't consider myself a very technical person. I was very lucky that I knew the Fairlight room inside out, so getting things onto tape was easy for me, but the sounds I would have been recording, I would have kept completely dry and flat, so that later when Les mixed it, he could add whatever EQ was needed to make it sound great. Basically, I avoided doing very much of the original sounds as they went down to tape so as not to fuck it up. So I wasn't sure what Pete was talking about when he was saying nobody else had been able to get the sound he was after before, but I wasn't going to question it. If Pete was happy, I was happy and relieved. All I was worrying about was how loud the level of his voice was, and trying to avoid it going down to tape too hot and distorting. Pete also had new lyrics he'd written that he wanted to add to the track. He wasn't keen on the fact that Bowie's original just repeats the first verse twice, so he came up with alternative lyrics to sing over verse 2.
Your daddy says it's a decadent word because you look so pretty in your ribbons and curls. Big brothers making eyes at you, and you are tempted to do just what a rebel would do. No one in New York City's gonna mess with you because you're 6 feet tall and you can kick like a mule. I'll say, hey, hey, baby, look so fine. I'm so lucky that you're mine, all mine. They put you down, they got you wrong. Fix the beat, go on and on and on and on, being on. Rebel, rebel.
As well as this new verse, Pete also added new lyrics to the outro of the song. And as we worked on the track, we really got used to all these new lyrics, and they definitely added something to the recording, making it more Pete, and in my opinion, elevating the song. We were all aware, though, the new lyrics would have to be approved by Mr. Bowie at some point, but we were confident and hopeful we'd get his approval. Bowie's original has backing vocals that are quite chanty, so Steve suggested he and I get behind the mic and recreate those. I've just listened to Bowie's version and I've realised the La 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 BVs we did aren't on the original, so not sure whether that was my idea or Steve's. Anyway, Pete is ecstatic about it all, and that's a very good start for our working relationship. It wouldn't always be that way.
Oh, what are you doing to me, you fucking dickhead?
On week 2 of the project, we start a new track, which isn't really a new track. So where I've started Rebel from scratch, for the next few tracks we worked on, Steve had brought in some floppy disks with Cubase arrangements. He's been working on these from his home studio, and for reasons unknown to me, the next track we get up was on Happy Birthday. Now, Dead or Alive fans out there will know that this song was included on the Fan the Flame album. I have no idea why we're recording this one again, but like I said earlier, I'm there as a facilitator to whatever the band want to do. So I load up Steve's arrangement into my Atari and we start finding sounds for the MIDI arrangement we've copied over from his disc. We repeated the same work methods we had for Rebel on this one and pretty much all the tracks on the album. I'd play some keyboard ideas and get them down. I'd audition drum samples until Steve would shout out that he either liked it or hated it, and we'd slowly build up the tracks that way. With Unhappy Birthday, the aim was to make it tougher and edgier. We lost all the more orchestral elements and replaced them with more aggressive synth sounds. There's still a lot going on, but it does feel a bit more stripped back. I've added a vocal lock. The original song is quite complex. It's not a simple song and there's loads going on. So we've stripped out some of the sections featured on the Fan the Flame version, like I Believed in You, and we have more repetition of fewer elements in ours. The intro piano riff on ours is one that we keep coming back to, again to make it simpler and more basic. In an effort to make it more clubby, we've made a lot more of Tracy Ackerman's Hey Yeah line on our version and not recreated the gospel choir used on the original. Part of me thinks that Pete and Steve were really proud of this song and some of the other Fan the Flame songs and maybe felt that they deserved a larger audience. Bearing in mind Fan the Flame hadn't been released outside of Japan, so now they have this new record deal, and why not use these songs, which to many will be completely new titles. Again, we spent roughly a week working on this one, and when I say a week, I don't remember us working extremely long days. I'd usually get in around 10 and work for a few hours before Steve would join around lunchtime. It would be Steve that would come in most days and Pete would join here and there. I obviously loved it when he'd join us, as the banter between those two and the stories. Pete and Steve were also great mimics, so when they'd be telling their stories, they'd impersonate whoever they were talking about. And Pete in particular was a master at this, really capturing the mannerisms of somebody. It was hilarious, and Christ knows what his impersonation of me was behind my back. Generally, we'd finish before 10, and sometimes the band would be gone way before that. There didn't seem ever to be a pressure to get the album finished. It's like we were just taking it at a lovely slow pace, and that's the way I like to work. I hate being rushed to get things finished before they're ready. So the third track we started on the 8th of February, and it's another oldie but goodie. Its first entry in my diary is labelled as Total Stranger. Again, another one from Fan the Flame. But on Wednesday the 9th, it's down as I'm a Star. So 2 things. Number 1, this is my favourite track on the album. Number 2, this shows you how fast Pete Burns was able to come up with a finished lyric, because my recollection is Steve took a cassette home of what we'd done with updating the Total Stranger track. And when Pete came back in, he'd written a completely new song over the instrumental. I can't believe it was the very next day, but I remember being completely excited when he sang this down to me, and it was like the old Pete was back, with lyrics that were clever and aggressive and just everything I loved about this man's artistry. In the lyrics on I'm a Star, Pete's created a character, I guess loosely based on himself. Let's face it, he was a diva. But the character in the song is his onstage persona taken to the max. The star in the song toys with getting a gun and could be a serial killer just to get to number 1. There was often humour in Pete's lyrics, but this song really took it up a notch. And he's referencing Take That and George Michael, calling them such crashing bores. There really had been nothing like this song in his catalogue up to this point. He was pushing himself to try something different. There was comedy in there, but it sounded so fresh. It's hard to believe, listening to him deliver this song, that he could at times be very shy. And where the character in the song sings, "You want looks, I got 'em, my Zell's already shot 'em," Lynn explained to me that this actually in reality never happened. Pete did have the opportunity to work with world-famous photographers, but his shyness would often prevent him from working with new people, preferring instead to work with the people he knew and trusted.
I mean, that was the thing with Pete. If he was comfortable with someone, it's like with Paul Cox, the photographer. He tended to go to them all the time because he was comfortable. Didn't like to go outside of his comfort zone, which was frustrating for me because he had lots of opportunities to work with amazing, and that was sort of my area. Dave LaChapelle wanted to take pictures with him, Stephen Meisel, but he was just too shy to work with those people. I mean, they would approach him. It's not like he was approaching them. I could understand that he would be nervous about rejection, but it was never that.
They're instigating it.
Yeah. Wouldn't do it.
I could tell he was particularly excited about I'm a Star, because whenever he'd get excited in the studio, he'd want everything done now. So whatever idea he had in his head, he'd want to hear it straight away, and it could be 2 ideas at the one time, and I'd be scrambling around trying to make it happen, a bit stressed, but then I'd do something and he'd scream, "That's it! I love it!" Then I'd have to try and remember what it was I'd just done so as not to completely piss him off. It was intense, but these bursts would be few and far between. I wondered how Pete felt about these sessions and about being back in the studio. And I was curious to know whether Lynn remembered anything about the writing sessions when Steve would bring instrumentals like I'm a Star home.
I know Pete was very enthusiastic with that album because it was a different sound, wasn't it? It was much harder and what you wanted to do. And I was excited about it.
I always got the impression Steve would be working with me on the instrumentals, and there was a couple that he'd take home to get Pete kind of inspired and to kind of get his creative juices flowing.
Exactly.
To get him writing, and I always got the sense it was hard work. It was like Steve was really having to push Pete to be creative.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was?
Well, he sort of lost interest, in the whole music business.
Mm-hmm.
And he did struggle just writing. I mean, he wasn't solo, but, he was used to writing with a band, and everyone would bounce off each other. So I think that was the first project that he didn't have that.
Yeah.
So he struggled a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
I mean, if I knew then what I know now, like I would have just really pushed harder to do more instrumentals, because I really didn't know what was going on.
No, of course
But
not.
now, I was like, I would have just been banging them instrumentals out and getting them so he could... Because
Exactly.
he was just wanting to be inspired, and like, because when they came back, you could tell he was really excited. Like, I'm a Star and Nukleopatra were two of those songs that really impressed me. And the song, the lyrics were like fucking amazing.
Yeah, but he was an artist that needed, because he wasn't a musician per se. He did play an instrument. I mean, he'd pretty much sing into a mic, and he'd have an idea, but it's hard to communicate it if you don't play anything. But I think if there was a backing track that he could feel energised, and I know he definitely was with Nukleopatra. Yeah, and I'm a Star.
Yeah.
Was Sex Drive on that album?
Yes, he'd recorded Sex Drive with the Italian guys, Glam.
Yes.
And so that, I think, had come out probably before we started working together, because I remember Steve played me that quite early on. I was like, this is amazing. Like, this was the songwriting.
Exactly.
This is the writing Pete should be doing.
And it was that very electro-pop sound. It was a lot harder than anything they'd done before. And it really worked well with Pete's voice.
And interesting lyrics.
Yeah.
Just like the concept of that song.
Exactly.
Because you were at home when they were going back to write these things.
Yes.
And when Pete was excited about something, he'd be screaming because...
Can
you remember moments like when they were writing and he'd be so happy with the idea?
I do.
Yeah,
and he didn't want to stop, he didn't want to sleep, he wanted to be there all the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really into
That's
it.
how he would go when he was inspired.
This explains how I'm a Star came back the very next day after we'd finished the instrumental. Pete also told me that for certain songs in the past, he'd just got in front of a mic and not knowing what was going to come out of his mouth, a stream of consciousness would flow out of him and it'd be a finished lyric. On one of these occasions, he told me he hadn't written anything down when all of a sudden out of his mouth into a microphone popped, "Your sweet nature, darling, was too hard to swallow. I got the solution. I'm leaving tomorrow." Shocking, eh? So what is the difference between Total Stranger and I'm a Star? Total Stranger is about 120 BPM, I'm a Star 128. The chords for the first verse and chorus of both songs are the same, and you can sing Total Stranger over I'm a Star and vice versa. We use the same approach of stripping away a lot of the music from Total Stranger when we did this one to make it tougher and not as pretty as the original song. The original song, again, was quite complicated. It had lots of sections, a lot of chords, and even key changes. We simplified it to just 2 chord sections, the verse and the chorus. Pete's new top line and lyric also really helped in giving this song a very unique vibe. It's got a completely different personality to Total Stranger, and the new song was way more up my street than the original. So by the end of week 3, we now have 3 tracks ready to be mixed. These first few weeks of recording with the band and getting to know Pete, Lynn and Steve were some of the best times in a studio I've ever had, and I have some really special memories from this time. I should say though that at this point I had no idea it would turn out to be a full album project. I have a feeling that these first 3 tracks were recorded so Pete Waterman could hear what Dead or Alive would sound like in 1994 before deciding on whether to proceed with the project. That's my take on it. But we now have 3 tracks under our belt, and on week 4 we're ready to go upstairs to the Bunker studio to mix them with Les Sharma. Coming up in the next episode.
Pete wanted to change the lyrics and Bowie wouldn't allow it.
My first week at PWL, they were recording the Donna Summer stuff.
So of course, because who the hell at International Crisis? I think it was unanimous it was a bad idea.
And that voice, the guy was such an iconic figure.
But in truth, any videos in the past, It was always difficult to have that cohesive thing with a band that, you know, they're not really interested in dressing up like Mike and Tim.
Steve and Pete lived in a different time zone to normal people.
Absolutely loved it. That was always my thing, you know, hair, makeup, fashion, behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Pete was like my dress-up dolly in many ways. It was like having a giant dress-up dolly.
My thanks to Lynne Burns and David Howells for joining this episode. Also thanks to Demon Music Group for allowing me to include all the music you've heard today. If you haven't already got your copy of Nukleopatra, why the hell not? Head over immediately to demonmusicgroup.co.uk and get your copy now. Lots more to come on our Nukleopatra adventure. In the next episode, we'll talk to Les Sharma, not only about mixing Nukleopatra, but also about his time at PWL assisting the legendary Phil Harding. We'll hear more from Lynn about the Rebel Rebel single by International Crisis and shooting what she considers to be Pete's best video. Hope you've enjoyed the story so far. If you have, please leave a review as it helps others find the podcast. You can find me at Barry Stone Music on Facebook, Instagram and TikTok. You can also sign up over at barrystonemusic.co.uk to access Nukleopatra's Tune, where you'll find bonus material from the podcast. I'll see you for more Nukleopatra adventures in the next episode. Until then, bye for now.